Jason and Emily, avid hikers, sought a new challenge. They had heard whispers of a remote trail deep in the mountains, untouched by civilization, known only as the Silent Trail. The name intrigued them, so they packed their gear and set off, excited for the adventure. The trail began innocuously enough, winding through dense forest and across babbling streams. But as they ventured deeper, the forest grew unnervingly quiet. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of their boots on the leaf-strewn path. "Why is it so quiet?" Emily whispered, her voice startlingly loud in the eerie silence. Jason shrugged, trying to dismiss the unease gnawing at him. "Maybe it's the altitude." But the silence wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. They pressed on, but the trail became more difficult to follow. The trees closed in, branches twisted in unnatural shapes, and the path became barely discernible. As dusk began to fall, a thick fog rolled in, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. "We should set up camp," Jason suggested, his voice tense. Emily nodded, relieved to stop. They found a small clearing and set up their tent, the silence more suffocating than ever. As they prepared for the night, the fog thickened, curling around them like icy fingers. In the dead of night, Emily was jolted awake by a noise, a faint, distant whispering. She strained to listen, heart pounding in her chest, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was as if the forest itself was speaking. "Jason," she hissed, shaking him awake. "Do you hear that?" Jason listened, his face draining of color as the whispers grew louder, more distinct, forming words that sent chills down their spines. "You shouldn't have come." Suddenly, their tent was illuminated by an unnatural light. They unzipped the entrance and stepped out into the fog, which now glowed with a sickly, greenish hue. The trees around them seemed to pulse, the branches reaching toward them like grasping hands. In the distance, they saw figures, humanoid, but wrong. Their limbs were elongated, faces obscured by shadows, and they moved in a jerky, unnatural way. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "We have to get out of here," Jason said, his voice trembling. They grabbed their gear and ran, abandoning the trail as they plunged blindly into the forest. The fog thickened, the whispers now a cacophony of voices, all chanting the same haunting phrase: "The Silent Trail is not for the living." Branches scratched at their skin, roots seemed to trip them intentionally, and the figures followed, always just at the edge of their vision. The forest itself seemed to twist and shift, disorienting them, leading them deeper into its clutches. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, they stumbled into another clearing. In the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its bark blackened and cracked. At its base was a stone altar, covered in strange, runic carvings. Jason approached it, drawn by some unseen force. This is wrong," he muttered, but he couldn't stop himself. As his hand touched the altar, the forest erupted into a deafening roar. The ground beneath them shook, the fog swirled violently, and the figures emerged from the trees, closing in on them. Emily screamed, pulling Jason away, and they ran again, fueled by sheer terror. The forest seemed to tighten around them, the path narrowing until they were forced into a tunnel of trees. Just as it seemed they would be trapped forever, they burst out into the open air. They found themselves at the trailhead, gasping for breath, the fog and whispers gone as if they had never existed. Behind them, the silent trail loomed, dark and foreboding. Without a word, they fled back to their car, vowing never to speak of what they had experienced. Away, Jason glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. In the distance, standing at the edge of the forest, were the figures, watching them leave. And in his mind, he heard the whisper once more: "The Silent Trail never lets go." Jason knew then that they hadn't truly escaped. The Silent Trail had marked them, and one day, it would call them back.